Hey everyone, I'm Dave Horton, and I'm super excited and honored to be a part of TAD Summit Asia 2021. Woohoo! I'm the creator of Dractio, which is an open source SIP application server that's designed to make SIP server applications as easy to build as web applications. And I'm also the creator of Jambonz, an open source CPaaS for service providers that's built on Dractio. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. You know, my personal journey as a developer has been an interesting one. The first half of my career, I worked exclusively on the commercial side, building closed source products and companies around those products. And then in the second half of my career, I switched over to open source. So I've had the good fortune being able to gain some great experiences and perspectives from both sides. And one of the aspects of working in open source that I really enjoy is the community. Meeting people, even virtually like this, exchanging ideas, getting help and giving help, learning about what other people are doing and what problems they're trying to solve. This rich sense of community is a big part of the reward that comes from working in open source. And the folks like Alan, who are the builders and sustainers of the community, deserve a lot of credit. So I want to thank him for putting on this event, as well as the whole stream of TadHack events going back over the years. I have great memories of participating in TadHacks in the past and look forward to doing more in the future. Now, the title of my talk is Introducing Cloud APIs for Jambonz. But that's not where I want to begin. I want to begin by rewinding to a great talk that was given in a TAD Summit event last year by a good friend of mine named Dan Jenkins from Nimble Ape. Because in many ways, my talk is a bookend to his talk. Well, he gave a talk entitled, "The difference between your project succeeding or burning to a crisp is actually you." And in his talk, Dan makes the compelling case that as open source developers, we often get in the way of our own success. And he says the way we get in the way of our own success is that we don't put in the work. What I'm going to call the last mile kind of work. The fit and finishing kind of work. The work to make our open source products easy to trial, easy to evaluate, and eventually easy to acquire and use by our prospective customers. Well, maybe you've seen this. Maybe like me, you've done it yourself. It's the first meeting of your new open source project with a prospective customer. Let's call him John. You're psyched. You're introducing your baby to the world, and you're desperate for it to be liked. You tell John all about the new project and the problems it's going to solve for him, and then, when he shows some interest, you move in to clinch the deal. You spill a box of shiny new parts all over his floor, and then you turn to him and you say, "Isn't this beautiful? Do you see all the things we can build with these beautiful parts?" And John is horrified. He doesn't want all these parts all over his floor. And for that matter, while he's looking at the mess in front of him, he probably doesn't see your vision of what they could be used to create either. So it's a transaction that's doomed to failure 9 times out of 10. We can probably all verify this in our own lives, right? I recently bought an outdoor grill. Wanted to do some summer barbecuing. Now I had a choice of buying the grill pre-assembled or assembling it myself. Which do you think I choose? Well, of course, I chose pre-assembled. I wanted the grill, but I didn't want to spend a day putting it together. And imagine, what if I wasn't sure about the grill? I wanted to try it out because I knew the seller had a good return policy. How likely would I have been then to spend a full day putting it together, just so I could get to the point of actually trying it out and deciding whether to keep it? Not very likely, I think you'd agree. Yet that's what we are asking our prospective customers to do every day in most open source projects. And that's what Dan was saying, or it's what I think he was saying. And his point hit home at a particularly good time for me because I was engaged yet again in building some new parts on the floors of my customers. Because right at the time I saw his talk, I had just started to roll out Jambonz, which I mentioned is a CPaaS designed for use by service providers. Well, this time I'd tried to do better. When it came to packaging, I'd created some Terraform scripts to hopefully simplify customer installs. I'd created some documentation to provide guidance and so forth. But when I listened to Dan's talk I realized all I was really doing was spilling those parts on the floor in a slightly more organized way, creating a nice pile at the feet of my customer, as it were, instead of scattering them far and wide across his room. But I was still expecting the customer to assemble them, still expecting the customer to hop through multiple hoops just to get to a starting point of being able to trial my software. So, on a whim, I decided to do something I would not recommend to any of you. I decided to follow advice from Dan Jenkins. I decided to build a hosted platform for jambonz that lets customers sign up for a free trial, provision a domain, and start testing instantly. A hosted platform that would allow them to properly trial the software, after which they could download and install the open source, or simply keep running on the hosted platform. Their choice. In short, I wanted to build a CPaaS based on open source that could compete against the commercial closed source CPaaS providers that have traditionally been so much easier to trial. And that's the jambonz Cloud API platform, which is what I'm going to show you today. It's currently in a private beta, and if you'd like to sign up to participate in the beta, then I'd love to have you involved, and I'll be giving some instructions on how you can do that later in the talk. Before I show you the hosted jambonz platform, I wanted to share some of my learnings along this stage of the journey, because I think those experiences, as much as anything, might be valuable to others. Well, to keep it brief, there are two big things I learned in this process. First is what I call this last mile work is not as intrinsically rewarding as building the core product. And second, it's expensive. Well, let's talk about this. Last mile work is not as intrinsically rewarding. Basically, it's not as much fun. For an engineer, anyways. Because a lot of the work at this stage is not building software, but it's other aspects like working out marketing angles, considering legal requirements, things that many engineers and myself don't necessarily love doing, probably because we don't do them that well. Furthermore, this last mile kind of work, like any kind of finishing work, can seem to be frustratingly slow. You've been used to piling new features into the core of your open source software at mind-blowing speeds, and now suddenly progress seems to have slowed to a crawl for some reason. Well, it's because you're dependent on multiple parties at this stage of the work. It's because this work can take longer review cycles at this stage. And I guess just because fitting disparate parts together always takes more time. For an engineer, it seems like you've downshifted into a lower gear, and well, it's not fun. But you have to stick with it. Let's take the second point. It's expensive. When you hit that last mile, you're no longer going to be able to do all the work yourself. You're going to need some folks to help with website development, with marketing, with legal. And that's not even mentioning the outlays of cash for infrastructure to run the platform. For a lot of open source projects, these costs can't be funded directly, which I think is a big reason why our industry has migrated towards this model where commercial companies typically swoop in and carry these open source projects the last mile to market. In my case, the direct out-of-pocket expenses were pretty significant, at least as measured by the dent to my bank account. But equally so was the opportunity cost of lost revenue while working on the project. So of course that begs the question, was it worth it? Well, of course, to a certain extent, we won't know the answer to that until we see how the future turns out. That's what's so fun about the future. But what was clear to me at the outset, besides the motivation of Dan's talk, is that if you really want to capture the value of your own work and control, in some sense, the software that you've created in an open source model, then you need to make some effort towards bringing it to market. Because creating software and carrying it 90% of the way towards a market and then leaving it there for someone else to pick up and ride victoriously into the market square with it, well, that just seems like a losing proposition to me. So I suppose in the end, the motivation for the project was as much as anything about exercising some control over my own work product. I guess another way to answer the was it worth it question is to look at the project goals, and then in retrospect, we can see if we ended up achieving them. Well, there were really 3 goals I had in mind when I launched this project. The first is exactly what Dan was pointing towards: significantly increasing trials of the product. By moving from a bucket of parts model to the click and go model, it seems reasonable to expect trials of the product to increase significantly, factor of 10 if not more. Well, increased trials leads to increased adoption. Increased adoption leads to the real end goal, which is the holy grail of all open source projects: achieving a rate of quality improvements in the software that cannot be matched by closed source competitors. Second goal: there's going to be some number of customers that will be happy to run their production traffic on a hosted platform rather than building up their own. And this provides a way for the project itself to capture and benefit from some of that revenue, feeding it back into improvements for the software itself. And finally, it provides a very simple and direct way for people to support the project financially if they want to. You know, I think that often when it comes to open source projects, people have a willingness to provide financial support, but they aren't quite clear on what options are available to them, or maybe on what the people running the project would like to see. This makes it really simple. Anyone that wants to support Jambonz can simply sign up for the minimum paid plan. It'll cost them less than $100 a month, and they'll know they're supporting and contributing to the project in a very real and affordable way. And of course, in the bargain, they've got a platform that they can use for testing and for running production traffic. So those are the goals of the project, and only time will tell whether we achieve them. But you can help by participating in the private beta for Jambonz. If you want to do so, and you're willing to trial it actively and provide feedback, email me at daveh@jambonz.org for an invite code. Okay, let's get to the part I promised you, showing you how to get up and running with Jambonz Cloud APIs. Let's head over to jambonz.org and sign up for a free account. All right, well, let's start by going to jambonz.org. And we can sign up for the hosted service. Now again, we're going to need an invite code, which I've got one here. And then we can sign in, either with email or OAuth. I'm going to use my GitHub OAuth to sign in. So the first thing we need to do is choose a domain. This is where we're going to have our carrier send our calls, and if we're registering devices, that's where devices will register to as well. I'm just going to pick Dave H. And it looks like it's available. All right, I'm signed up. So it's that easy to sign up. You can see I'm on a trial plan, and it's going to let me make up to 20 simultaneous calls and 200 registered devices. So everybody starts with a free trial, and if you like it, you can upgrade to a paid subscription. Now we've got a couple of to-dos we can see right away. To finish our account setup, we need to add a carrier to route our calls, and we need to add speech credentials so we can do text-to-speech. So let's just quickly go through those tasks. So, add a carrier. When adding a carrier, there's a bunch of information we can put in. Of course, some of the most important information is the SIP gateways of the carrier, their inbound and outbound gateways, and there's some other options as well, as you can see above. To make it easier, there's some well-known carriers or predefined carriers that are all set up. You can select from a list. And I'm going to use Voxbone, since we're international here in Asia, and Voxbone's a great international carrier. So I choose Voxbone, and you can see I'm all set up with their gateways, their inbound gateways, their outbound gateways. And I need to put in it knows that Voxbone requires authentication, so I'm going to put in my Voxbone username, Workshop D. Horton. And I'm going to put in my Voxbone outbound calling password, if I can remember it here. And Voxbone has a nice feature, I think, where a lot of carriers authenticate based on the calling party number in the from header. Voxbone can do that, but you can also provide the Voxbone DID in the diversion header. And that's nice because it lets your CLI be some other number. So I'm going to go ahead and put my Voxbone DID, which I happen to know is 1716. Oh, there it is right there. All the phone numbers in the system in jambonz are kept internally in E164 format without the leading plus. That's it. I just added Voxbone as a carrier. Now I need to set up things on the Voxbone side as well. I need to point my Voxbone trunks to, well, like it says right here, I need to point it to daveh.sip.jambonz.us. So let's go do that quickly in the Voxbone portal. Okay, the first thing we do is configure a Voice Uri. We're going to have a Voice Uri. Well, it's not quite jambonz.org, it's jambonz.us. So that's their syntax. E164 in the curly brackets means whatever the dialed number was, put that in there in E164 format. And we're going to send it to my domain that I just created, daveh.sip.jambonz.us. Let's save that. So we've created a Voice Uri. Now we need to attach it to some DIDs. So let's go configure DIDs, and let's look at our DIDs. And I've got a couple DIDs. I'm going to route both of these to my jambonz account. So I select those two and go to Voice Uri, and I pick my Voice Uri and I apply, confirm, and I'm done. So now I'm fully configured on both sides. I've got Voxbone set up as a carrier in jambonz, and over in Voxbone I'm sending calls to jambonz. My outbound calls to jambonz will go back to Voxbone. They'll use my credentials that I plugged in when I created the carrier, and they'll use my diversion number as part of the authentication as well. So we're good to go. Let's go back to that other to-do we have. Oops, sorry, not carriers. We need to add a speech. Going to add speech services. Going to add Google. So I want to use Google for speech. Let's just go through the process of setting it up. I'm going to go over to my Google account and I'm going to create a new project. Call it whatever, that's fine. We'll just call it my project there. Wait for it to get created. And I'm simply going to enable speech APIs for this project. So let's search for speech. Cloud speech APIs. And I want text to speech. Well, I want both. I want speech to text and text to speech. So let's go ahead and enable both of them. That's speech to text. Let's go back and get text to speech as well. Okay, so it's that easy. Created a project in Google, enabled cloud text to speech, enabled cloud speech to text, and now I simply want to generate a JSON key that I can upload into jambonz. So go here, create credentials. I want to create a service account. I'll just say testing, my testing, create the account. I don't need to grant any users access, so I'm going to be done there. So I've created a service account. Let's click on it. Now I just want to generate a key for that account. And I want to add a key, create a new key, and I want a JSON key. Create it. There it is. It's been downloaded to my laptop. So let's go back to jambonz. We were in the midst of adding a speech service for Google, so let's choose a file. I'm going to find that same file that we just downloaded. And we'll say we're going to use it for text-to-speech, and we're going to use it for speech-to-text. Go ahead and add it. When we add it, it gets tested to make sure that both of those APIs are enabled. You'd get an error if they weren't, and we can see with the green checkbox they're enabled. Okay, so speech is in place, carriers are in place. And yeah, oh, by the way, I can add AWS speech credentials if I wanted to as well. So with AWS, I'd be adding an access key and a secret access key. And that's pretty straightforward, of course, as well. Okay, so we've done the two main to-dos, adding a carrier and adding our speech. We're actually ready to test now. Let's just take a quick look at the home page before we do that. We've got some information about our subscription again. We've got the SIP realm that we created. By the way, we can change that at any time. If we started with some test name and then we decide that was a horrible name and want to change it, we can do that. We've got an account identifier. We've got some things we haven't specified yet that have to do with SIP devices or WebRTC clients. I'm not getting into that right now. Webhook signing secret as well. Call detail records are enabled, and we can generate API keys. So that's just kind of a quick look at the home page. But applications are the key thing here. We're all about building applications. And we need an application to test with. So let's test inbound calling. Now to do that, I've actually got some public applications that anybody can use. So there's one called Hello World. It's available under https publicapps.jambonz.us, and there's one called Hello World. All it does is receive your call and play some text-to-speech. And it can receive a call status as well. There's no authentication. We're going to use the post method. And we can choose the speech language and so forth. And I think we'll go with, let's go with WaveNet C. So we've got an application, Hello World. Well, what we've got really is a webhook that returns an application. Now, how does that get invoked? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is at the carrier level, we can say everything coming in from Voxbone, we want to hit this application. So let's do that to start with. Okay. So now I've got a system pretty much fully configured. I've added Voxbone as an inbound carrier, and I pointed my Voxbone trunk to my domain name. I added some speech credentials, and then I routed all calls from Voxbone to an application. Let's go ahead and try dialing the application, see what we get.
Hi there, and welcome to jambonz. Jambonz is the CPaaS designed with the needs of communication service providers in mind. This is an example of simple text-to-speech, but there is so much more you can do. Try us out.
Okay, so right there we just verified our Voxbone connectivity, inbound calling. Our speech, text-to-speech is working. We're fetching this application, so everything looks good. And of course we can fool around and change this. Have fun with languages if we want. Let me just change it to Australian and we'll try it again.
Hi there, and welcome to jambonz. Jambonz is a CPaaS designed with the needs of communication service providers in mind. This is an example of simple text-to-speech, but there is so much more you can do. Try us out.
All right. So we verified inbound calling and we verified speech. Let's make an outbound call. We've got another application that's kind of useful for that. It dials out to a speaking time clock in Canada. So let's just call it dial time clock. And it's this URL. Again, it's public apps, jambonz.us dial time. And we'll send call status. And we're all good. So now we've got two apps. Now, you saw before that by default, we're routing all the calls from Voxbone to our first app, our Hello World app. And that's the default, but we can override that if we want at the phone number level. So let's go ahead and do that. And to do that, we need to enter in our phone number here. So we're going to add a phone number. It's going to be our other Voxbone number, actually. Let's just go back and see what that is. We can copy it, and we'll take our 213 number. So we'll say we've got a 213 number from Voxbone, and we want to, when calls come in on that number, we want to hit the dial time clock. Again, the dial time clock is going to do an out dial. So we're going to test both inbound, we're going to do a little text to speech, then we're going to be outbound to a clock that announces the time every 10 seconds. Not so exciting, but it will test everything. Well, let's give that one a shot.
Hi there. Please hold while we connect you to the talking clock, which is graciously provided by the National Research Council Time Signal of Canada.
NRC, Eastern Daylight Time, 20 hours, 59 minutes, exactly.
Well, there you go. It wasn't the most exciting thing, but darn useful for testing your outbound calling when you're setting up a new carrier. If we go look at our call history, we can see we've got a couple of calls. Some will show up again in a sec with this last call. If we hadn't configured speech properly, we'd see an alert, and we can see things that are going on, problems with our webhooks and so forth on that. But that's basically it. In just a few minutes, we've created an account on jambonz.org, configured our carriers, plugged in some speech, tested both. We're ready to write applications next. Well, this has just been a basic introduction to Jambonz. There's more to learn, and I'll be putting together more videos and information about that. Well, thank all of you for listening to my talk. And once again, big thanks to Alan Quayle for putting this event on. And finally, if you're interested in participating in the private beta for Jambonz, email me at daveh@jambonz.org. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.